It was late afternoon at Westbridge University, and the sun spilled through the tall glass windows of the mathematics building. The air inside felt tense and heavy, not with noise but with deep silence, the kind that comes only when brilliant minds are completely lost in thought. On the big whiteboard at the front of the room was a mess of numbers, strange symbols, and long formulas written in every color of marker. It looked less like math and more like art, confusing, chaotic, but strangely beautiful. 10 math professors sat scattered around the room, some standing, others hunched over papers. They were among the brightest people in their field, respected for their research and publications. But today they all faced the same problem, one single equation that none of them could solve. This wasn't just any math problem. It had come from a research paper that connected mathematics to quantum computing, something that only the top minds in the world could understand. The paper had mentioned an unsolved expression, an equation that could in theory simplify a new kind of algorithm used in modern encryption. The professors at Westbridge wanted to crack it before anyone else did. For days they had been trying. They erased, rewrote, debated, argued, and stayed long past midnight. Yet every path led to the same dead end, an imbalance, a missing link that didn't make sense. It was as if the equation was mocking them. Professor Howard, a tall man with glasses slipping down his nose, rubbed his temples in frustration. "There has to be a pattern," he muttered. "Equations don't lie. We're just missing the connection." Across the room, Professor Lane dropped her marker and sighed. "Maybe it's a trick. Maybe whoever wrote this knew it was unsolvable. Maybe it's meant to test us." No one responded. They were all too tired to argue anymore. The room was filled with the faint squeak of markers, the rustle of paper, and the hum of the old ceiling fan that did little to move the warm air. In the corner of the room stood a gray metal bucket and a mop, quiet reminders that someone else would have to clean up this chaos when the day was done. Around 6 in the evening, the door opened softly and a man in a simple dark blue uniform stepped in. His name was Mr. Daniels. He had been the university's janitor for over 15 years. He knew every corner of the campus, every creaky floorboard, and every flickering light. To most of the professors, he was just the janitor, the man who appeared when everyone else left. But to those who noticed, he was gentle, respectful, and carried a quiet pride in his work. Walking in behind him was a boy, about 16, wearing a faded hoodie and carrying a small notebook. It was his son, Ethan. The boy often came with him in the evenings, especially when his father worked the late shift. While his father cleaned, Ethan usually sat at the back of a classroom, finishing his homework or reading. Mr. Daniels nodded politely to the professors, who barely looked up. "Evening," he said softly. "Evening," one of them murmured without turning around. He set his mop and bucket by the door and whispered to his son, "Stay quiet, okay? They're working." Ethan nodded and sat in the back row, opening his old worn-out notebook. He wasn't paying attention at first, just doodling shapes, writing numbers, and flipping through a book of physics problems he'd borrowed from the library. But soon his eyes drifted to the board. Even from where he sat, the symbols looked fascinating. He couldn't help but stare. The longer he looked, the more curious he became. He didn't understand everything, but certain parts stood out, like a word written in a language he half knew. He had always been drawn to numbers since he was little. While other kids spent hours on games, he found comfort in math puzzles and online lectures. It wasn't something he bragged about. He didn't have expensive tutors or special classes, but he learned whatever he could from free websites and old books his teachers gave away. He didn't know much about the world of big professors or complicated research, but the logic of math always made sense to him. It was simple in its own way, fair, predictable, and honest. Meanwhile, at the front of the room, frustration was growing. "This makes no sense," said one professor, tossing his marker onto the desk. "The left side just won't balance. We're looping in circles." Another professor leaned back, shaking his head. "Maybe we should call it a night. Our brains are fried." "No," Professor Howard said. "If we stop now, we'll lose the pattern we've been working on. Let's take a short break. Get some air." They all agreed reluctantly and began walking out, heading for the coffee machine in the hallway. The room slowly emptied until only Mr. Daniels and his son remained. Ethan's eyes went back to the board. He tilted his head, reading each part carefully. Something about it didn't look right. The top equation used a transformation rule he had seen before. a shortcut that only worked under specific conditions. But here it was being used differently. He thought for a moment, then stood up. His father looked up from sweeping. "Ethan," he said quietly, "what are you doing? Don't touch anything. These people are working." "I'm just looking," the boy said softly. "I think they made a small mistake." His father frowned, unsure if his son was serious. "They're professors, son. They know what they're doing." Ethan smiled a little. "Yeah, but maybe they just missed something simple." He stepped closer to the whiteboard, his heart beating faster. The markers lay scattered on the tray below. He picked one up, the blue one, and without really thinking, he started rewriting one section. His movements were calm, confident, not rushed. His father watched nervously but said nothing. For a minute, there was only the sound of the marker gliding across the board. Ethan erased a few parts, adjusted a symbol, and then wrote a short series of steps below. He leaned back, staring at what he had just written. And there it was. Balance. It wasn't magic. It was logic. He had noticed that one transformation was reversed, and by flipping it, everything else fell into place. The numbers lined up. The equation made sense. It was beautiful in its simplicity. His father blinked, not fully understanding what he was seeing. You solved it?" he whispered. "I think so," Ethan said. "It just needed to follow a different path." Before they could say more, the professors returned, holding cups of coffee and looking just as tired as before. But when Professor Lane looked up at the board, she froze mid-step. "Wait," she said, squinting. "Who changed this?" The others turned too. Their eyes moved across the board, confusion spreading quickly into disbelief. Professor Howard walked closer, his face tightening. "What happened here?" "Who?" Then he stopped. He began tracing the lines with his eyes, muttering under his breath. Slowly, the realization hit him. This works," he said. "It actually balances." The room went silent. Mr. Daniels stood awkwardly, holding his mop. Ethan stared down, unsure what to say. "Who did this?" one professor asked again, looking around. The janitor hesitated, then said quietly, "My boy did. While you were out." The professors exchanged looks. Disbelief, curiosity, even a hint of embarrassment. One of them stepped forward. "Your son, how?" Ethan looked up shyly. "I just saw the mistake. The rule you used on the second line only works if the variable is independent. I changed it, and then the rest followed." The professors were stunned. For a few seconds, no one spoke. Then Professor Howard, still staring at the board, gave a quiet laugh. "I've been working on this for 3 days," he said. And he solved it in 1 minute. Ethan smiled nervously, not sure if he was being praised or teased. But then, something shifted in the room. The professors began to look at him differently, not as a janitor's son, but as someone who had just done something extraordinary. Mr. Daniels felt a warmth in his chest he hadn't felt in years. He had always known his son was smart, but this was beyond anything he imagined. The boy put the marker down and stepped back. "I didn't mean to mess with your work," he said softly. "I was just curious." Professor Lane smiled for the first time that evening. "Curiosity," she said, "is exactly what makes a real scientist." The other professors nodded in quiet agreement. No one laughed now. That night, as the father and son walked home under the orange glow of the streetlights, Mr. Daniels looked at his boy and said, "You know, Ethan, I think tonight changed something, for both of us." Ethan didn't say anything, but he smiled. He didn't know it yet, but that one moment, that one quiet evening, was only the beginning of something much bigger. The next morning at Westbridge University started like any other. Students hurried across the courtyard with books in hand, the sound of footsteps and chatter echoing against the stone walls. But inside the mathematics department, the mood was anything but ordinary. News of the unsolvable equation being cracked overnight had already started to spread, whispered between classes and coffee breaks. Nobody knew the full story yet, just that the impossible problem written on the board had somehow been solved. In the main lecture hall, the 10 professors sat again, gathered around the same whiteboard. The blue marker lines from the night before were still there, clear and confident. None of them had been erased. Professor Howard stood in front, arms crossed, staring at the neat lines that changed everything. He hadn't slept much. The image of the young boy solving it, the janitor's son, kept playing in his mind like a loop. He couldn't stop thinking about how effortlessly the boy had seen what 10 trained mathematicians had missed. Professor Lane broke the silence. We have to confirm it. If this solution is correct, it could be a breakthrough. But we can't publish anything without understanding how he did it. The others nodded. They'd checked the logic several times already, and everything matched perfectly. Still, it was hard to believe. How old did you say he was? One professor asked. 16, Howard replied quietly. There was a pause. A teenager had done what they, with years of study and research, couldn't. It was humbling and a little uncomfortable. A few professors smiled it off, saying maybe it was luck. But deep down they all knew it wasn't. What that boy did wasn't random guessing, and it was understanding. That afternoon, Mr. Daniels returned to the university for his usual shift. Pushing his cleaning cart down the long hallway, he was nervous. He had no idea what would happen after what his son had done the night before. He had spent most of the day thinking about it, half proud, half worried. He hadn't told anyone, not even his coworkers. How could he explain that his teenage son had solved a complex math problem that top professors couldn't? It sounded unbelievable. When he reached the lecture hall, the professors were waiting. Mr. Daniels, Professor Howard said kindly, could you ask your son to come here again this evening? We'd like to talk to him, just to understand what he did last night. The janitor hesitated. Is there a problem, sir? Howard smiled slightly. No problem at all. Quite the opposite. We're very impressed. That evening, Ethan came along again, this time a little less shy. He had no idea that he had become the center of conversation across the department. When they entered the room, the professors greeted him warmly. Ethan, said Professor Lane, we looked at your work from last night. What you did was brilliant. Could you show us how you reached that conclusion? The boy looked surprised. Me? I just noticed something small. The second variable shouldn't depend on the first. Once I changed it, the rest worked out on its own. He spoke simply without showing off. His words were clear, honest, and humble. The professors listened closely, taking notes as he spoke. Howard handed him a fresh marker. Would you mind going through it again on the board? Ethan nodded and stepped forward. His father stood quietly in the back, trying to stay out of the way, his mop leaning against the wall. For the next few minutes, Ethan explained each step slowly, rewriting parts of the equation and describing why he made each change. The professors asked questions and he answered them with surprising ease. What stood out most wasn't just his intelligence, it was how naturally he understood the patterns. He didn't rely on memorized formulas or complicated theories. He simply saw the problem differently. By the time he finished, the room was silent again. The professors looked at one another with quiet astonishment. You have an incredible mind, Ethan, Professor Lane said softly. Have you ever taken any advanced math courses? Ethan shook his head. No, ma'am. I just read things online sometimes. Videos, old papers, that kind of stuff. I like figuring things out. Howard smiled. Do you plan on studying mathematics in the future? Ethan looked down, unsure how to answer. I'd like to, he said quietly. But we can't really afford a university like this. Mr. Daniels felt a pinch in his chest hearing that. He had always wanted his son to dream big, but he knew how hard it was to pay for higher education. One of the professors exchanged glances with Howard. We'll see what we can do about that, he said gently. When they finished, the professors thanked him and asked if he could come again the next day. They wanted to test his skills on other problems. Ethan agreed, more out of curiosity than ambition. To him, it was just fun, solving puzzles he couldn't stop thinking about. That night, as they walked home, his father said, They're impressed with you, son. Ethan smiled. They're just being nice. No, his father said firmly. You did something big. Don't ever think otherwise. They walked in silence for a while, the cool air brushing past them. The streetlights glowed softly, and the faint sound of crickets filled the quiet. At home, Ethan sat by the small table near the window. His notebook was open and his pencil moved quickly across the pages. His father watched him for a moment, then said, You really love this stuff, don't you? Ethan grinned. It's like, when I look at an equation, it's like a puzzle that wants to be solved. I can't stop thinking until I figure out why it works. His father nodded slowly. Then you should keep going. Don't let anything stop you, even money. If you love it, you'll find a way. The next day, Ethan returned to the university again. This time, there were even more people waiting. Not just professors, but graduate students too. Word had gotten around. Everyone wanted to see the janitor's son who had solved the impossible problem. They gave him new equations to try. Some were simple, others much harder. But every time Ethan surprised them. He didn't always get the answers right, but his way of thinking and the way he approached each question amazed everyone watching. He didn't follow the usual rules. He found shortcuts, patterns, and ways to simplify what others made complicated. It was like his brain was wired to see hidden connections. After a few hours, Professor Howard called for a break. He walked over to Mr. Daniels and said quietly, "Your son is something special. I've never seen anyone think quite like him." Mr. Daniels smiled with quiet pride. He's always been curious. Ever since he was little, he'd ask how everything worked. Machines, clocks, anything. I guess numbers just made more sense to him than words. Howard nodded. "We'd like to help him. There are scholarships, mentorship programs. He deserves a real chance." For the first time in a long while, the janitor felt something he hadn't felt before. Hope. Real, solid hope. Over the next few weeks, Ethan began spending more time at the university. The professors invited him to sit in on lectures, gave him books, and even allowed him to use the lab computers to explore advanced math software. He learned fast, faster than anyone expected. Every day he absorbed more, and every evening he shared what he'd learned with his father on their walk home. But not everyone was happy about it. Some students whispered that he didn't belong there, that he was just a janitor's kid getting lucky attention. Ethan heard the whispers but didn't say anything. He knew who he was, and he knew what he loved. One afternoon, a senior student challenged him to solve a problem on the board during a study session. It was complicated and filled with strange symbols meant to confuse him. The room went quiet, waiting to see if he'd stumble. Ethan took the chalk, studied the problem for a minute, and then calmly began writing. Line after line, his steps flowed easily, each one logical and clear. Within 5 minutes, the board showed the final answer, correct and perfectly explained. The room stayed silent until one of the professors clapped. The others followed. Even the student who had challenged him nodded in respect. Mr. Daniels, watching from the back, felt his throat tighten. He had always dreamed of giving his son a better life, but he never imagined it would begin like this, inside the same classrooms he used to clean. That evening, as they left, Ethan turned to his father and said, "Do you think it's okay that I'm here? I mean, I'm not really one of them." His father looked at him carefully and said, "You solved something no one else could. You've earned your place more than anyone here." "Never doubt that." Ethan smiled quietly. He didn't know what the future would hold, but he knew one thing. This was just the start. The equation he solved wasn't just a problem on a board. It was a door, and now, it was opening wider than he could ever have imagined. A week had passed since the day Ethan solved the impossible equation. Life around the university began to shift in small but noticeable ways. Professors spoke in hushed voices about him. Students whispered his name in the hallways, and even the university's dean had begun to take interest. For Ethan, things still felt the same. Every evening, he came to the campus with his father, carrying his small notebook. But now, instead of sitting quietly at the back of the lecture hall, he was invited to sit up front, sometimes even beside the professors. It all felt strange, almost unreal. One afternoon, after a long day of study sessions, Ethan walked across the empty courtyard with his father. The sky was orange with the fading sun, and the wind carried the faint smell of the cafeteria's coffee. His father looked at him with pride. "You've become quite the celebrity here," he said with a small laugh. Ethan smiled shyly. "I didn't mean to. I just wanted to help." "I know," his father said. "But sometimes good things happen when you least expect them." They walked in silence for a bit, the sound of their steps echoing against the old stone path. The next morning, the dean of the university called a meeting with the math department. Everyone gathered in the main conference room, the same professors who had once struggled over that impossible equation. The dean adjusted his glasses and spoke in a calm, serious tone. "I've reviewed the reports. This young man's solution is not only correct but innovative. It opens up a new way of thinking about the problem. He paused for a moment and looked around the table. This could put Westbridge University in the spotlight. Professor Howard nodded. He has a gift. There's no doubt about it. The dean leaned back in his chair. I want to meet him. That evening, when Mr. Daniels and Ethan arrived, they were told to go to the dean's office. Ethan's father seemed nervous. He'd never been called there before. They walked through the large wooden doors and stood quietly as the dean greeted them with a smile. Ethan, I've heard quite a lot about you, he said. You've done something remarkable. Ethan shifted slightly, unsure what to say. Thank you, sir, he murmured. The dean gestured for them to sit. You see, your solution has caught the attention of other universities and even a few tech companies. They want to understand how someone your age saw what experienced mathematicians missed. We'd like to help you develop that talent. Ethan's eyes widened. Really? His father looked just as surprised. The dean nodded. Yes, we're offering you a full scholarship here at Westbridge. You can study mathematics and computer science, completely free of cost. In return, we'd like you to work with our research team. What do you think? For a moment, Ethan couldn't speak. He looked at his father, who had tears in his eyes. I don't know what to say, Ethan whispered. His father smiled proudly. Say yes, son. This is your chance. Ethan nodded slowly. Then, yes, I'll do it. The dean extended his hand. Welcome to Westbridge University, Ethan. You've earned it. That night, as they walked home, the city lights seemed brighter than usual. The world felt bigger, full of new possibilities. At home, Mr. Daniels sat at the kitchen table, still in disbelief. His hands were rough and calloused from years of cleaning floors, but now, those same hands had helped open a door for his son that he could never have imagined. You did it, son, he said softly. You're going to college, no, and not just any college. The same place I've been sweeping floors all these years, Ethan smiled. I couldn't have done it without you, Dad. His father shook his head. No, you did this on your own. You saw something no one else did. You've got a gift, and now you'll get to use it. The next few months moved quickly. Ethan started attending real classes. At first, he felt out of place sitting beside students who came from wealthy families, who had tutors and private lessons. But it didn't take long for his talent to shine through. He worked hard, sometimes staying late in the study halls, scribbling equations and notes until the janitors began their rounds. He still greeted them. They were his father's friends, and he never forgot where he came from. One evening, while he was studying alone in the math lab, a professor walked in. Still here, Ethan? He asked with a gentle smile. Ethan looked up. Just finishing something. I can't stop thinking about a new formula I read earlier. The professor nodded. That's how great minds work. They don't rest until they find answers. Ethan smiled faintly. It's not about being great. It's just, I really love it. The professor looked at him for a long moment. That's exactly why you'll go far. In time, Ethan began helping with small research projects. The professors trusted him with problems that even graduate students struggled with. His ideas were fresh, and his way of thinking always seemed to find hidden patterns others overlooked. News about the janitor's son prodigy started to spread beyond the campus. First, a small article appeared in the local newspaper. Then a few online blogs picked up the story. Within weeks, journalists were calling the university, wanting to meet the boy who solved the impossible. When Ethan read the first article about himself, he laughed in disbelief. They're exaggerating, he told his father. I just solved one problem. His father smiled proudly. Maybe so, but that one problem changed everything. Soon after, an educational channel reached out to do a short documentary about him. The crew came to film him during his lectures, his study sessions, and even while he walked with his father across the campus. During one of the interviews, the reporter asked, "What went through your mind that night when you solved the equation?" Ethan thought for a moment and said simply, "I didn't think about fame or success. I just wanted to understand. That's all." That answer touched people. It showed his humility, a quiet reminder that true genius isn't loud. It's thoughtful. The video went viral online. People everywhere were inspired by the story, not just because a young boy solved a hard math problem, but because of what it represented. It was about hope, hard work, and the idea that brilliance can come from anywhere. But with fame came pressure. Suddenly, expectations grew. Everyone wanted something from him. More discoveries, more breakthroughs. Some students treated him like a genius, others like a rival. There were nights he sat awake staring at his notes, feeling the weight of all that attention. What if I can't live up to it? He whispered once to his father. His father put a hand on his shoulder. You don't have to live up to anything. Just keep being yourself. You don't need to prove anything to anyone. That advice stayed with Ethan. He continued to work quietly, focusing not on recognition but on learning. The professors admired his discipline and kindness. He never acted superior or distant. He always helped others who struggled. One day, during a public seminar, he was invited to present his solution to visiting scientists and mathematicians. Standing in front of hundreds of people, Ethan felt his heart race. He took a deep breath and began explaining, not with big, complicated words, but in the same simple language he always used. When he finished, the audience stood up and applauded. It was the loudest applause the university hall had heard in years. After the seminar, a man approached him, a representative from a major research institute. We'd like to offer you an internship, he said. You have a rare gift. We want to help you grow it. Ethan couldn't believe it. He looked at his father later that evening and said, This is too much. Everything's happening so fast, his father smiled, his eyes full of pride. You've earned every bit of it. You just keep walking the same way you always have, with humility and curiosity. The rest will take care of itself. That night, as Ethan looked out the window of their small apartment, he thought back to the evening it all began, that quiet night when he'd picked up a marker out of curiosity while his father cleaned the floors. He smiled. It was strange how one small moment could change an entire life. But maybe that's how the world worked. Sometimes, the biggest changes start quietly, with a simple decision, a single thought, or one act of curiosity. And though the world now saw him as a young genius, Ethan never forgot the truth. He was still just the janitor's son, the boy who loved numbers, who asked questions and who believed that no matter where you come from, brilliance can still find its way through. Months turned into a year, and Ethan's life continued to change in ways he had never imagined. The small classroom where he once sat quietly was now a place where others came to listen to him speak. Professors discussed his ideas, newspapers wrote about his progress, and students from other universities came to hear him explain complex problems in his simple, clear way. But as his world grew brighter, new challenges began to appear, ones that couldn't be solved with numbers or equations. At first, the attention was exciting. People admired his story, a janitor's son who became a math prodigy. But over time, that story started to feel like a label he couldn't escape. Every time someone introduced him, it was never just Ethan Daniels, the student. It was always Ethan, the janitor's son who solved the unsolvable. He respected where he came from, but sometimes he wished people would see more than that one story. He wanted to be recognized for his work, not just his past. One afternoon, after a long lecture, he sat quietly in the university garden, his notebook open but untouched. Professor Howard noticed him sitting alone and walked over. You look lost in thought, the professor said kindly. Ethan smiled faintly. Just thinking, sir. About your work? Ethan shook his head. About everything else. I thought solving that problem would make life easier. But now it feels like I'm carrying everyone's expectations. Every time I write something, people want another miracle. The professor nodded slowly. That's what happens when people see talent, Ethan. But remember this, you don't owe anyone perfection. You just owe the world your honesty and effort. That's enough. Those words stayed with him. He kept working, but he also started to notice the little things he had missed before. His father's tired eyes after long shifts, the way he still refused to take a night off, even though Ethan now had a scholarship and small research grants coming in. One evening when they were walking home together, Ethan said, Dad, you don't have to work so hard anymore. I can help now, his father smiled softly. I know, son. But this job, it's part of who I am. I clean the same classrooms where my son studies. That makes me proud. Ethan nodded, understanding. His father didn't see his work as something lesser. He saw it as a part of their story, the foundation of everything that had brought them here. Still, Ethan wanted to do something for him. So when his first research stipend arrived, he used it to buy his father a new set of cleaning equipment and a small radio to listen to music while he worked. It wasn't much, but when he handed it over, his father smiled like it was the best gift in the world. Life went on, and with time, more opportunities came. One day, Ethan received an email from a well-known research institute in another country. They had seen his papers and wanted him to visit for a short program. It was the kind of chance that could change his career forever. He read the message 3 times before showing it to his father. "That's amazing, son," his father said with pride. "You have to go." "But it's far," Ethan said. "And I don't want to leave you alone." His father laughed softly. "I'll be fine. I've been alone before. This is your time. Go see the world." "You've earned it," so Ethan agreed. Within weeks, arrangements were made. The university covered his travel expenses and the professors helped him prepare. When the day came, his father walked him to the train station. As they stood by the platform, his father said, "You know, when you were little, you used to ask me why I always cleaned the same hallways every night. I told you it was because I liked things to shine. Now I see, maybe I was just waiting to see you shine instead." Ethan smiled, holding back tears. "I'll make you proud, Dad." "You already have," his father said quietly. The train pulled away, and as Ethan looked out the window, he saw his father standing there, waving, the evening sun glowing behind him. It was a moment that stayed with him forever. When Ethan arrived at the research institute, everything felt different. The place was larger, the people came from all over the world, and the conversations were filled with ideas he had never heard before. For the first few days, he mostly listened, observing how others thought and worked. But soon he found his rhythm. During one workshop, he noticed a pattern in a data model that everyone else had missed. When he explained it, the entire room fell silent, just like it had that first night at Westbridge. "You're absolutely right," one of the senior researchers said, astonished. "How did you see that?" Ethan shrugged modestly. "It just looked uneven to me. I wanted to fix it." The researchers were impressed. They began to include him in more projects, and by the end of his visit, they offered him a long-term position once he finished his studies. It was more than he had ever dreamed of. But even as new doors opened, Ethan's thoughts kept returning home. Every night he called his father. They talked about everything: work, life, and the small things that made them laugh. One evening during a call, his father said, "The university put up a little plaque with your name on it outside the math hall. I walk by it every night. Makes my shift a little brighter." Ethan smiled, feeling a lump in his throat. "That's your name too, Dad. That plaque wouldn't exist without you." When he returned home months later, the professors and students greeted him like a hero. But all he wanted was to see his father. He found him in one of the lecture halls, mopping the floor just like always. His father looked up and grinned. "Back already?" Ethan dropped his bag and hugged him. "I missed home," his father chuckled. "Well, the floors missed you too." They both laughed, and for the first time in a while, Ethan felt at peace. But success doesn't come without sacrifice. As the months went by, he started working on a major project with his professors, something that could advance mathematical modeling in artificial systems. It was exciting, but it demanded long hours, late nights, and constant focus. There were times he didn't eat properly, barely slept, and forgot to check in with his father. One night, when he finally came home after days of working straight, he found his father sitting quietly at the table, the radio playing softly in the background. "You're pushing yourself too hard," his father said gently. "I just want to finish this paper," Ethan said. It could mean everything. His father looked at him carefully. "Son, remember this. Success means nothing if you lose yourself trying to hold on to it. The world can wait. Your health can't." Ethan nodded slowly. Those words hit him harder than any lecture or warning ever had. The next day, he took a break. He walked through the city, sat by the lake, and just watched the water move. For the first time in a long while, his mind felt quiet. He realized that all this time he had been chasing perfection, trying to prove that he deserved every bit of attention he had received. But he didn't need to prove anything anymore. He returned to his work with a clearer mind, but this time, he worked differently, slower, more balanced, and with gratitude for what he already had. When his paper was finally published, it received praise from all over the academic world. Yet when the reporters asked him what he felt, he said something simple. "It feels good, but what feels better is knowing I didn't do it alone." Everyone expected him to thank the professors or the university, but he looked at the camera and said, "The real credit goes to my father. He's the reason I learned how to keep trying, even when things looked impossible." That video spread online and people around the world were touched by his words. They saw not just a genius, but a young man who remembered his roots, who stayed humble no matter how far he went. One night, when Ethan came home, his father greeted him with a proud smile. "They played your video at the staff meeting today," he said. "I've never seen so many people cry." Ethan laughed, but his eyes shone with emotion. "You're the real hero, Dad." His father shook his head. "No, son, you are." They sat together quietly, the small radio playing softly in the background, the same one Ethan had bought months ago. Outside, the city lights flickered, and the world felt big again, full of numbers, dreams, and endless possibilities. And in that quiet room, surrounded by love, Ethan realized something he had never fully understood before, that real success isn't just about solving problems. It's about remembering who helped you believe you could. The years passed quickly, but for Ethan, they were full of discovery, challenges, and small victories. The boy who once quietly sat in the back of a lecture hall, observing equations on a whiteboard while his father cleaned the floor, had grown into a young man who could inspire entire rooms with his ideas. Yet despite all the recognition, he never lost sight of the simple truths that had carried him this far. One bright morning at Westbridge University, Ethan walked into the math building carrying his notebook and a cup of coffee. The hallways were busy with students rushing to classes, professors exchanging notes, and the occasional tourist peeking inside the old building that had become famous for one remarkable story. But Ethan moved calmly, smiling at familiar faces, greeting janitors, and occasionally stopping to offer help to a struggling student. He reached the lecture hall where he had first solved the impossible equation. It was quiet now, just him and a few graduate students preparing for a small seminar. He paused at the door, taking a deep breath. So much had happened here, opportunities, discoveries, and moments that changed the course of his life. And yet, it all felt like a continuation of the same journey, a journey that had started with curiosity, patience, and a single act of observation. The seminar began. Ethan explained a new problem he had been working on, carefully walking the students through the logic step by step. He didn't speak in complex jargon or try to impress anyone with technical terms. Instead, he spoke with clarity and care, making even the hardest ideas feel understandable. As he finished, the students applauded, not just for the solution, but for the way he had made them feel that they could tackle it too. After the seminar, Professor Howard approached him. "Ethan," he said, "the work you've done recently, it's groundbreaking. But more importantly, you've shown everyone here how curiosity and persistence matter more than privilege or background. You've changed lives." Ethan smiled quietly. "I'm just doing what I love."